Welcome to the channel everybody, thank you for checking out this video. In today's video I'm going to show you how to do a basic edit in Lightroom 2022. Let's jump straight into it. So this is the image that I'm going to be working on, and what I'm going to be doing, quite like these houses down in this bottom quarter here, bottom third, and that's how we're going to start editing. Now if you're not sure how to import a photo into Lightroom, just go to library and click import down here, and then you go through where your removable drives are or your storage devices and import it. There'll be a link down at the bottom of the button there where it says import, and all we've done is import it into Lightroom, and then we're going to go up here to develop and start developing this photo. So there it is. Now the first thing we have to do, we have all these tabs down the right hand side, and normally you work through them as you go through your edit of your photo. So we go to the basic tab, and the first thing you want to do is, or what I do, is change the profile from Adobe Color to Adobe Standard. And what this does is just removes any kind of, it's already put a preset of Adobe Color on it. We're just going to remove that if you watch the image here as we change it. And there we go, it goes a little bit lighter. Now the next thing we're going to do is choose our white pinpointer and select something white in our image. Now if you press Ctrl plus, you can zoom in. So we'll find something white. Let's go for this building here, that looks pretty white to me. And there we go. Now as you zoom out, if you're not happy with the color temperature from your white pinpointer, you can always move your temperature up or down. Move it left to make it cooler, up to make it warmer. Now I was at 51, let's go to Saint White again, roughly that. And if you want your tint changed, this is the tint slider, so you can add green to your image or magenta if you go right. Now to get this right is obviously down to personal taste. If I want it a little bit cooler with a little bit of more magenta in it, that's how you do it. Just raise and lower these two pointers. But let's just select something white again, and we'll go from there. That looks pretty good. Now because I want to focus on this bottom third down here, we need to crop our image. Now you go up here to the crop tool and you can resize your image. Now if you hold down left shift, it keeps the proportions of your image intact, keeps them intact. Now I like this road at the bottom here coming through the center, and I quite like these trees in the image also. And we've also got a church up here in the right hand corner, so it's important that we get this pretty much how we want it. I think that's about right. Once we're done, we click close, and there we go. Now we can zoom into the image and we can move it around and have a look by pressing Ctrl plus or Ctrl minus to zoom back out. But there's the image, and now that's looking pretty good with all the different rooftops and houses there. So now we go to exposure, and we use the exposure slider. We raise it up, we increase the exposure, and if we lower it, we remove the exposure, darken the image. So we go up here to our histogram, we can see that it's just on the darker side. This to the left hand side of this histogram at the top here, this represents our dark areas. To the right it represents our lighter or highlights. So we can see here, if we take that as about the center, all our colors are slightly pushed darker. So I'm just going to raise the exposure slightly so it's roughly in the middle. Probably about there, 0.35 higher. Now we've got a good starting point to begin working. Now our contrast, we can raise that slightly. And if you look at our histogram, all we're doing is stretching our from our darks to our highlights. That's what our contrast does, it pulls them and stretches them. Now I'm not going to go too much on this because we're going to be using highlights, shadows, whites and blacks to also add contrast in a second. So I'm going to go to about 25 on our contrast. Highlights, now one technique a lot of people like to use is they lower the highlights and increase the shadows, and that gives it a kind of HDR-y look, but it looks a little bit over processed for my taste, so we don't do that. What I like to do is just raise and lower until I feel they're right. As you can see, as we raise the shadows, all the dark areas are coming out, giving us a little bit more detail there. So I'm just going to raise it to a point that I'm happy with it. Now our whites, if you hold down left Alt and begin to slide it up, eventually you can see all the highlights being blown out in your image. If I go all the way up there, obviously that's very overexposed, we don't want that. All you want to do is get it to a point where they're just starting to come through. There's a little bit of a reflection there on some of the building, on some of the windows. That means we're perfect, got the highlights perfectly exposed, or the whites. Now I like to just bring them down just slightly, just before they're showing. There we go. Now our blacks, we do the same, left Alt again, and begin to slide it down. And if we go all the way to the bottom, we're crushing them blacks, and it makes it look very processed again, so we don't want to do that. Now hold down left Alt and just begin to slide it, and you can see the dark areas down here in the bottom corner just beginning to come through. And you get it to the point where you want it, just like that. Next we come down to the presence, and texture is all the finer details in your image. So if we zoom in a bit, Control plus, and raise our texture, all the brickwork and all the windows are going to be pulled out, all the detail there, by adding texture. Or if we want to remove that texture, soften it, then we lower it. I prefer to raise it by about 20. I'm just going to raise it until, if you look here on these windows, you can probably, hopefully YouTube ain't compressing this too much, but we're getting the detail coming out on the brick wall there about 40. So I'm going to keep it about 40. Now the clarity is the larger details in our image, for example the rooftops, etc. So if we think of texture as fine details and the clarity as larger details, so if we raise the clarity, you can begin to see all them details being pulled out of the image. Again, if we lower it, it softens the image. So I'm just going to find a point where it looks good to me, about plus 20, that looks good. Just going to press Control minus again on my keyboard to zoom out, and look at that, that's looking pretty good already. Now our dehaze is to remove the haze in the end. If we lower it, we add haze, and if we move it to the right, we obviously remove the haze. Now it's all down to personal taste. I like to higher it a little bit, normally about plus 15, and in this case I'm just going to judge it by eyeball what I think's right, about there, but plus 20 on this particular image seems right to me. Now vibrance and saturation, again this is all down to personal taste. I like to add a little bit of vibrance, and in this image we've got all these yellows and oranges and blues, so I'm going to add quite a lot of vibrance in this particular image. So plus 36 there, and that looks pretty decent to me. Now the saturation, now a lot of people won't always overdo the saturation, they whack it up and it gives it a really artificial look, which I don't particularly like. So I'm just going to leave the saturation at 0 for now, because that's looking pretty good. Right, that's the basic tab done, and we're already moving along quite nicely. Next we go to our tone curve. Okay, the tone curve, now I'm not going to explain how the tone curve works. All you have to know is the right hand side up here is all our highlights, and down here are all our shadows. So the best way of doing this, I find, is using the sliders. Now you can move the line yourself individually and use it with different colors, but the way I like to do it is just with the highlights. Just look at your image and pull it left or right, and you'll find one way works for you and one way doesn't. Kind of one way looks better, one way looks worse. So just going to raise it up slightly to about plus 15 there, just bringing out a bit of detail in the walls. And what I'm trying to do is enhance the image as we're working through the tabs. Next we go to the lights. Just going to raise that again. One way will appear right, one way will appear wrong. It's all down to personal preference and how you like to edit your photos. So I'm just going to raise that up just very slightly, so plus 7 and plus 4. Now the darks, again I'll look at that, how we lower it. what you'd normally find is with the highlights and lights, you go one way, and with the darks and shadows, you tend to go the opposite way. You find that they work by going opposite ways. So with our darks, we're just going to lower that down slightly. To me, that looks pretty good, -14. And we're just going to do the same with the shadows till we feel it's right. And about there, -20 on the shadows. And already that image is looking fantastic. Now we can compare it to the original by pressing Y on our keyboard. There's the before, and that's where it is at the moment. And all we've done is a basic edit so far to get it to this stage. So let's move on now. We've done the tone curve, minimize that. Now normally you go to HSL and color grading, but I always like to miss them out and go straight onto detail first. So we go to the detail, and all I'm going to do is zoom in again by pressing Ctrl+. I'm going to zoom in quite a lot here. I'm just going to raise the sharpening until I begin to see the sharpness come through. Now you can hold left Alt and it'll go black and white as you move the slider, and sometimes that helps you see where the sharpening is coming in. And there we go. And the radius, as I've explained in some of my other videos, if you've not seen them videos, make sure you subscribe to my channel and check out some of them videos. This is kind of like you stretching over a sheet over this 3D image, and the more pressure you put on that sheet, the more detail comes through. Let me show you. So you hold left Alt, sorry, and as you can see, we're getting that detail coming through the sheet. So we're adding more tension as we raise the radius. And you just want it to the point where it's just beginning to come through. So 1.8 in this case, in this image. Detail is exactly the same kind of thing. You're going to stretch the grey sheet across, and you're just going to look for when the 3D images of the buildings come through, or whatever your subject is. So let's raise the detail. That's 55, and that's looking pretty good. Now we've introduced a little bit of noise here. We're going to reduce that down in a second. Masking. Now if we hold down left Alt and begin to slide, we can see what's being sharpened. At the left hand side, everything in our image is being sharpened, and if we raise it to the right, only the very outlines are being sharpened. So we want to find a happy medium of where we're happy with what's being sharpened. Let me zoom out a bit, Ctrl-. So quite high up, I'm at 90, and I'm happy with that. Again, all them outlines and some of that brickwork coming through. So Ctrl- again, and we've really done a good job there. Now I'm just going to zoom in quite a lot again, Ctrl+, and we're just going to have a look at the noise that's in the image, and it's actually not too bad. It's a little bit blurry, this image, may have just missed focus. And now what we can see here at the top of our histogram, I'm at f6.3, and that means maybe I was using slightly the wrong aperture for this image, even though it's quite far away. We may have missed focus slightly. But I'm just going to raise the noise reduction until I see the noises on the roof disappear. Now it's a balancing act between the detail and sharpening and the noise reduction. If I raise that noise reduction, we're losing that detail on the roof. So it's important that you balance this out between sharpness and noise reduction. And sometimes if you hold left Alt, you can also retain some of that detail by raising the detail slider also. Now contrast, that's exactly the same. Left Alt and just raise it, and sometimes you can see how that's affecting your noise reduction. There we go. So we've got noise reduction, luminance at 34, detail at 67, and contrast 48. I never touch color, detail and smoothness. I always leave them at default. Let's zoom back out again, Ctrl-. So there's our image, that's looking pretty pucker. Let's have a look at the original again by pressing Y. This is before, and this is after. You see how we've really brought in colours out and the detail in our image, and it's looking really good now. So press Y again on your keyboard to return. So we've done the detail. Let's go to our HSL now. HSL, and I always start with saturation. So this stands for hue, saturation and luminance. Now go to saturation, and all we're going to do is slide each of these sliders up and down, seeing what part of the image it brings out. Now there's no right way or wrong way of doing this. It's important that you look at the image as you increase the saturation on certain colours and just go with what you feel is right. Next we go to luminance, and luminance is how deep or light the colour tint is of our colour. For example, here's the red, and we've got a red garage door there. If I zoom in a little bit, Control plus. So if I move the slider to the left, we make the red darker, and if we raise it, we bring it lighter, turning it more into a pink. So what we're going to do is go through each of the colours, looking on the image, which areas are affected, and going with our own personal preference and how we like the look of the image. So I'm going to go through these right now and see how it adjusts our image. Okay, so there's a luminosity done. Now we go to the hue, and the hue is the tone of the colour. So again, if we look at the red garage door here by pressing Control plus, because this is red, we can pull it all the way to the left and it will turn it more purple, or if we move the slider to the right, we make it more yellow. So let's do that now. If we move it to the left, it goes purple, and if we move it to the right, it comes more orange or yellow. So exactly the same again, we work through these sliders until we're happy with the colour and the hue of the colour that we get. And that is the hue done. Now sometimes after I do the HSL, I go back to the basic tab and just have a mess around with my vibrance and saturation again, making sure that it's not overdoing or overpowering the image. Because with all of them colours with saturation and everything, sometimes you find that after doing it, we're blowing it out a little bit, and that's what we're really looking for here. Now as you can see up here on our histogram, our darks are quite crushed at the minute, so I'm just going to go back to our blacks as well. Press left alt and just alter our blacks slightly, bring them back to a happy place where I'm happy with them, and that's looking pretty puckered. Let's have a look at again at the original by pressing Y on the keyboard. So there's our before and there's our after. It's looking so much better. Okay, so we've done the basic tab, we've done a tone tab, we've done a HSL. Now if you wanted to do colour grading now on the image to give it a certain look, you would go in the colour grading tab. I'm not going to colour grade this particular photo in this video. But now what we'll do, we'll leave that out, and that'll be for a future video. So if you want to see that video, subscribe to the channel. Next we go down to lens correction, and we're just going to make sure that both of these are ticked. Basically it will remove the warping that your lens can potentially put on the image. So if I unclick it and watch the image, you can see how it's pulling and stretching, our lens is pulling and stretching this particular image. So what Lightroom will do, it will apply a profile to this particular lens to straighten out the image, and there it is. And obviously you can remove chromatic aberrations in here as well. So that's the lens correction done. Now transform, we don't want to use that, that's okay. Effects, and this is something sometimes I like to use. This is vignetting, so if we move it to the left we get a dark vignette, and if we move it to the right we get a white vignette. Now in this particular image, very soft vignette would actually work quite nice, just to pull you into the center of the image. Now the midpoint is just where you want it to aim for. The roundness, obviously how round you want the vignette, and the feather is how you want it to blend in and out. And there we go. So there's our edit of our Lightroom photo. As quick as that. And if I press Y again, we can look at the before and after. There's the before, and there's the after. Let's have a look at these in full size now. So here's the before, and here's our Lightroom edit. So let's look at the before again, and let's look at the after. So I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, give it a like down there. If you want to see further videos from myself, hit that subscribe button. But that's it for now, guys. We'll catch up in the next video. Thank you very much for watching.